So today I want to talk about those children who can read fast and very accurately, but unfortunately do not understand what they're reading. In a sense, they've actually overachieved in terms of wanting to read well, but they are in the long term going to be underperforming in terms of their potential. And these diligent children often slip under the radar. And yes, they are very likely to be among the 25% or so children who in year 7 step into secondary school unable to access the curriculum. So in the past 12 years, when I've been visiting schools and delivering Rhythm for Reading face to face, I've seen some really clear patterns in the data. Children always improve in different but very well defined ways. So I've seen these amazing patterns. And one of these patterns concerns this group of children who, at the baseline testing, are reading accurately and with good pace, but their reading comprehension scores are really comparatively low. So we're talking, about 4 years behind everything else. And what I find most surprising is that these are really conscientious children. These are the children who've read diligently every day at home, and they've come from really supportive homes where they've had parents who've really, helped them to read, and they have a reading age always above 8 in terms of accuracy, even if they're in year 3. And as I said before, the reading is usually really pretty pacey. But something has gone wrong because their reading just isn't meaningful and it seems pointless to them. They think it's their own fault, even though they've done all of that hard work. It feels unfair and it's a mystery, so it really weighs very heavily on them. Their reading comprehension is flatlining. Their chronological age and their reading rate and accuracy scores just continue to increase. More than anything, this pattern really suggests that reading researchers have kind of missed something basic, because I know that we talk about a reading comprehension deficit, but if it really was a reading comprehension deficit, we wouldn't expect them to improve in just a few weeks, would we? So there's something else going on here. Learning to read is complicated because there are lots of different skills that need to flow together in a really meaningful and self-sustaining way. So this is what we're going to be talking about. This topic really matters because reading fast and reading accurately is not going to cut it. It just isn't enough. It doesn't necessarily lead to reading well with ease, fluency, and understanding. And this topic is heartbreaking because children who are working hard are failing to take off as readers. So I see this pattern in year 3 and in every single year group all the way up to year 8. This isn't something that, it's like a rite of passage and they get through it and, it's a temporary thing. No, they can get to year 8 and they have never understood what they're reading, really. So by that point, these teenagers, age 13, who've been experiencing this reading block since they started reading, they assume that they are not intelligent. But actually, that is not the case. And these intelligent children and adolescents who are not reaching their potential really do believe that they are just not enough. And they really do blame themselves because conscientious kids will do that. They will always reach within to solve the problem. And today's post is all about this issue and how we can reframe the way that we support reading using rhythm. For as long as I can remember, we've been talking about, 10 minutes of reading practice a day, reading at home with the child, dads getting involved in reading, developing a culture of reading in a school. And yes, all of this is absolutely great. But what if we haven't covered this important thing that's missing? The sub-skills of reading may be unbalanced in these children. So actually, I would say that sub-skills of reading may be unbalanced in all the children who are not reaching their potential. Let's think of a few scenarios. Let's say that John has got clear strengths in vocabulary, but he's got weaknesses in visual memory. Then we look at Jenny, and she has weaknesses in phonemic awareness, but she's got strengths in visual processing. Individual differences determine how each child will learn to read. And if we rely on a single approach, it's not going to work really well for all of these children who've got these little quirky things that are slightly different, because we're all unique. Now let's think about Sally. When Sally tries to learn to read, no matter how hard she tries, she loses control of her attention and her focus scatters after just a few seconds. Deeper engagement with the text and the development of automaticity are definitely out of reach for her. And in this situation, the context of the sentence is likely to be of huge importance to her, and it'll be the main support actually. When she learns to read, she's going to rely on context to really help her to find her way through the shapes of the phrases and the words. But for Rupert, the opposite is true. Word reading has always developed rapidly, and he is always the first in line and ready to listen in class when his teacher's calling for attention. And as a conscientious child, his word reading is so far ahead of the way that he processes context that his strengths in reading accurately have become his only goal. There is no motivation for him to integrate the context because he always thought that being good at reading meant getting it right. And the context was something that really didn't get talked about very much in the early stages of reading when that pattern was established. And now, because reading really doesn't mean anything and he's not really enjoying it anymore, it's no longer satisfying him. He's losing interest in books. So for children who got strengths and weaknesses in their reading skills, is it possible that a rhythm-based approach might be able to kind of smooth the way, might be able to boost and re-engage them with learning to read? Can we use rhythm to reignite that spark of motivation when reading development that's not moving forward at age expectation is really stagnating? So according to my recent conversation with the Year 3 teacher, the answer to both of these questions is absolutely yes. She pointed to a remarkable change in the children's reading, and she thought that this was a result of doing, as she put it, a lot of things at once. So, of course, nothing focuses the mind like combining different actions at once while reading. After all, isn't this what we do when we learn to drive a car or learn to ride a bicycle or learn to play a musical instrument? Let's drill down. In her wonderful book, Proust and the Squid, Marianne Wolf refers to the work of Kat Studley when describing the parts of the brain that the children deploy in the early stages of learning to read. Of course, the early stages of developing any skill involve a transition from the general to the specific, meaning that as children become more specialized and streamlined in their skill development, the activity in the brain also becomes more niche. An adult uses smaller and really much more well-defined areas of the brain when reading than a child does for this reason. If we think about the universal reading system, which was named by Charles Perfetti, who's also the cognitive scientist well known for setting out the bottleneck hypothesis, it's really fascinating that reading skills involve not just one brain lobe, but all four of the main lobes of the brain. The occipital lobe area right at the back of the brain is for visual processing and visual association. And the parietal lobe, which is above and behind the ears, is for meaning making. And then the lobe at the front, the frontal lobe, and the temporal lobes at the sides, they process executive control, the sounds of phonemes, and the meanings that those phonemes represent. And there's more. Reading is a volitional skill, which means that it's an activity that we choose to undertake. However, as children become more skilled, the process of reading becomes automatic or automatized. The parts of the brain that are non-volitional, those parts that regulate language processing, breathing, digestion, and circulation, and so on. And when reading becomes automated, it's as if the co-pilot is taking over. So these subcortical areas are more difficult to study because they're located deep inside the brain. But we can appreciate their role in learning if we imagine for a moment how it feels to learn a skill such as driving a car. At first, we choose to move the controls in a specific sequence, and we repeat this sequence until our body is ready to take over and the sequence starts to run itself, it starts to flow. And as our subcortical areas become more adept at taking over the control of the car, it becomes a smoother process and the movements that we make become more efficient. It starts to feel as if we can really leave the body to run the sequence while we attend to the business of reading the road. And it's a similar situation when we hold a conversation. Our articulatory system, the jaw movements and the breath are coordinated with our utterances as an automated program. We don't have to think about how that happens. And this means that we can attend to the reading of the gestures and the facial expressions and the attentiveness of the person we are speaking with. Are they following what we're saying? Are they looking puzzled or are they nodding along? And of course, as teachers, we read our pupils' receptivity to learning all the time in the classroom. This is a really important part of what we're doing. So, in my opinion, there is a level of reading that we actually share with other mammals. For example, those who live in social groups, and particularly when there's a strong social hierarchy in the group. And I do think that long before we shared a system of squiggles on a clay tablet, we evolved to read natural cues. That might have been the direction of the wind, the tracks of the animals, the formation of the clouds, or the behavior of insects, animals, and birds. It's actually well known that hunter-gatherers communicate using certain ways of tearing tree leaves, and those are really meaningful to them. It's a system that they can use to communicate to one another, and that is a form of reading. But that said, our body automates the reading instinct using subcortical areas of the brain, such as the cerebellum, the thalamus, and the basal ganglia. And these areas build the efficiency, the fluency, and the precision into our reading and orchestrate those 4 lobes of the brain that are involved in the universal reading system. And they do this with millisecond precision and timing. Yes, indeed. And this is why rhythm can make such a huge impact to the development of phonemic awareness, reading fluency, reading comprehension, or just simply ease the flow of reading. So this brings me to attention and all its different qualities. Whether we're jolted to our senses by an alarm or lulled into a sort of hypnotic trance by a droning voice, we know that attention can become focused and sharp in a matter of milliseconds. The flow of reading involves releasing and casting attention in a way that is self-sustaining and dynamic. Whether following speech or print, our attention rides the rise and fall of the length and shape of each phrase, and of course, it is impossible to predict the course of any utterance, as word choice, style, and tone can influence word length and the density of language. But meaning making leaves clues that are not found on the surface of the words. But these clues lie buried in the deeper structures of the language, where syntax, morphology, and rhythm generate the predictive elements of meaning making. These processes, as we all know, involve the coordination of ears, eyes, and voices, but deep down, fluent reading depends on sensitivity to the quieter suffixes at the end of a word. This information allows reading to become meaningful because the most basic syntactic cues between nouns and verbs are engaged. The cerebellum sits at the top of the spine and plays an important role in the regulation of physical movement, including the control of eye movements. It also regulates our balance and coordination of all the brain areas involved in language processes. The frontal lobe, which sits above and behind the face, coordinates executive functions, attention, and working memory, which are essential for problem solving. Working memory has a capacity limit and it contracts under stress. But under optimal conditions, it supports rapid learning by retrieving information from long-term memory about content, words, letters, faces, objects, and their roles in time and space. Accessing information in working memory requires the focus of attention on specifically selected information. For decades, researchers have discussed different types of deficit, including a weak working memory or weak sensitivity to rhythm in relation to reading difficulties. So here is the question. If there was a real cognitive deficit, children who do not develop automaticity in their reading wouldn't make rapid progress in a rhythm-based reading intervention. It's likely that in this instance, children respond well to a change in approach, one that involves a complete reset of their attention, because they are learning to read fluently using musical notes, and then they can apply this reset to orchestrating the skill set needed to read printed language aloud. Earlier, I described reading as volitional because we choose to read, but the skill set involved in fluent reading, which is known as automaticity, is non-volitional, and it develops spontaneously in children who learn to read with ease. So enter the concept of self-regulation. Sometimes we learn skills with effort, for example, when we're learning to drive a car. And maybe we set ourselves a goal to attain, such as getting a driving license. And to do this, we're going to use effortful control to overcome any fears of driving and to learn the theory. And in terms of attention, there's dynamic shifting as necessary to build up flexibility whilst reading the road. And most important, there's the ability to inhibit the distractions that might delay progress. Self-regulation overlaps with executive functions such as working memory, flexibility, and the control of focused attention. But it is self-regulation of attention that is the strongest predictor of school success. It's even more important than a child's IQ. Did you know that Tom Cruise, the famous film star, developed his own approach to learning to read? He actually demonstrated remarkable self-regulation. He described himself as functionally illiterate when he left high school. But notice the importance of attention in what he says. I had to train myself to focus my attention. I became very visual, and I learned how to create mental images in order to comprehend what I read. Now, it's such a shame that self-regulation is something that many talented and motivated people must teach themselves so that they can learn to read. And I really don't believe that it has to be this way at all. I believe that a rhythm-based approach could and should be available in school so that young people who learn differently can be taught in the way that helps them to learn. And of course, building skills by using rhythm-based actions and reading musical notes means that we are really boosting the way that we engage with the skill set that's described by Marie Clay. Of course, this involves the cerebellum, the basal ganglia, and the thalamus, as well as the 4 lobes of the universal reading system. And why were the 3 children so engaged? It was just as their teacher had said. They had loved the actions, they had loved the music, and they said that it had been great fun.